All right. Hey, welcome back to the Go for CEO channel. My name is John the Bomb. Building others means business. I love my acronyms, and this guy that's coming on, not only acronyms, but just ways of doing things in the entrepreneurial space. So Go for CEO, stay tuned today. Subscribe to the channel, by the way, if you haven't become a subscriber. And, you're going to get some impact in the first few minutes here. The adaptive entrepreneur model was created by this guy. All right. He's also one of the partners of AGLX, and just a super stud. I was introduced by one of my other interviewees, Steve, and super pleasure. We're actually kindred spirits. We're Puerto Rican in background and stuff, so you see the hat on him. So
Yep.
we say, Primo, what's up, man? Welcome to the Go for CEO channel.
Buenos días, primo. ¿Qué tal?
Qué bueno, qué bueno. So, all right, man. So, hey, Mark, we want to jump in, man. I mean, you've done some incredible stuff. Obviously, former military, just incredible mind in the business world now, doing some incredible things. One of the partners at AGLX. Tell the audience here what they can get in the next first few minutes here of the impact that you're making for business.
So great question. When I was active duty as an officer in the Marine Corps for 6 years. And when I stepped out into the business world, I had a brief stint in medical sales, about 15 months. And then I got into the asset management world. And that's where I met Steve Luckenbach, who you had on the show recently. And going through, I entered that business in 05 before I left, and now I'm with AGLX, as you mentioned. When I got into 05, coming from a military background, I knew a lot of principles and how to conduct myself in a chaotic, complex, nonlinear environment, how to lead and influence others in a chaotic, complex, nonlinear environment. And at the time, 2008, we got to that, everything just went to heck, as you know, in that time. And I thought that was really my moment, because I was more active. I was going into more places. I wasn't running into competitors in 08. I felt like a lot of people were avoiding going into branches of financial institutions, which were where our clients were. And I started gaining more context of what I had been trained in the Marines as an officer to lead people through that. And I started digging on theories that we had been taught on how to think, on how to identify things like friction and get comfortable with things like uncertainty, and understand the intent, the purpose of what had to be done, and then translating that into mission. Mission is the what, intent is the why, and mission is the what. And then showing people that this was their moment when everything is bad and chaotic, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and the news was bad every day. And if you remember those days, the market's up 500, but then it's down like 900 the next day. I mean, just going all over the place. This is where I thought that leaders should be. This is where you should be more active. This is what they're hiring you for as advisors, or this is what they're hiring us for as wholesalers. We're supposed to be out there now in the bad times, influencing people and leading people. This is where we would make our difference. And I think it worked for me. But what it sent me on this path was going back and really examining what they had taught us, because I was trying to figure out, like, why am I so comfortable here? Like, why is this chaos not upsetting me like it is other people? And I started to realize then that markets were just like war fighting. It's a different uniform. It's a different set of VUCA. The term I use a lot is VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. It's the same exact thing. It's just there's no shots being fired. There's no incoming artillery or anything like that. And the nonlinearity of it, the unpredictability of it, the sudden change without warning. It seemed to me that when I had left, everything I'd been trained for in the Marines perfectly correlated to what I was doing in the business world. So I started taking notes and writing these things down, I went back and I finished my master's. I had started my master's degree in the Marine Corps, and then I went back and I finished it in economics. And I started tying some of the theories of what we learned for warfighting environment, trying to tie it into how can I sell myself as a partner to firms, but more as a consultant, helping them with ideas that no one else is gonna talk about, and ideas that are pertinent, that are they're gonna see me as a resource. They're gonna see me as a partner, because I'm putting skin in the game with them, in the sense that I'm going to go through it with them. I'm going to help them. I'm going to show them that there's a different way, and it's going to center around how you lead, and how you make decisions, and how you conduct yourself in chaos, or VUCA. So that's kind of a wild explanation, but it's really, the formula is pretty simple, or not. I don't want to say formula. The framework of thinking is simple. It's not easy though, but it is simple. And then that's what I do now full time with my teammates and partners over at AGLX, which is also a group of thinkers and practitioners that have been doing this for many years in the business world. So that's what I'm doing now.
What an incredible ride. I mean, the military teaches so many fundamental things. I think, every man, woman, and child, in the United States especially, should go through that process. Unfortunately, I did not, but I've always admired, kind of the stable, things that, are kind of the things that are just implemented right in the brain, right, and processed by guys like you, then come out. You've noticed over the last 5-10 years, there's a lot of Navy SEALs out there sharing. There's a lot of Marines sharing, and it's really neat to have the military come back into the civilian world and share some of these processes, because I think so many of us need it, right, and learn from it. Having been a business owner through those times of '08, I actually sold my business that I had. So I exited in 2009 early. But it's funny when you said kind of, you were trying to think, how is it that I'm so stable or kind of calm in this chaos? I felt very much the same way. So it's interesting to learn from you here. If VUCA, then OODA, right? Take it in order to process. So why don't we walk down then that next process, right? OODA, OODA. What does that actually mean? And how can people keep on, learning from what you're sharing?
Well, let me start by adding on to what you just said. One of my big thesis, my big ideas, is that you don't have to have spent one day in the military to learn these principles. The military is where I learned them, and the military is where a lot of them were discovered. And that's because when you think about it, people in the military are put into adverse, volatile, and uncertain, complex, ambiguous situations daily. And my point is that I can teach this to anybody. And people say, well, it doesn't apply to me. I was in the military. I'm like, well, if you like, I'll bring my 14-year-old daughter in, and she'll explain how she uses it for her field hockey team. And awesome. Yeah, so it's simple. It's not easy, but like, again, my argument is that let's say argument, but my thesis, you don't have to have spent one day in the military to learn these things. Are universal. And when you, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as an athlete, as anybody can do this. Once it clicks, you'll start to look at things differently. And in most cases, I'm not going to have to pull the rug out from under anybody. It's going to be refinements on how we look at what we're dealing with every day. And you're not going to have to go buy stuff, and you're not going to have to bring in new software or hardware. You're going to have to look at how you as a person look at things, and how you deal with people. The unbreakable order is people, ideas, and things. You can never, if you break that order, you're in a lot of trouble. So people, ideas, and things. Now, to the model that you're talking about, starting with the person, starting with the leader, starting with the entrepreneur, in the adaptive entrepreneurial model, the first thing that I have to accept is that the universe that I live in, the markets that I participate in, the traffic that I'm going to be in all day, the family environment, everything is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatile means it changes quickly without prediction. Uncertain is that I don't know. I can't predict the future with a crystal ball. It's impossible.
Mm.
And it also means that the things that, because of uncertainty, the things that I'm absolutely sure of might not be true. And I need to be open to that. Complexity, the connectivity that we all have, amplified by the technology that we all have access to now, it's unparalleled. You know, how did you and I connect, right?
Mm-hmm.
You interviewed a friend of mine, he called, you know, and then we got connected. And then as soon as we started talking, what happened? We realized we're probably cousins, right? Because we're, you know, like those sorts of things, like the connectivity that people have, the interdependency is more than we know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
example, I was going through my through the Denver airport with my daughter. She was getting recruited. She swims in college, and when she was getting recruited, we're out in Colorado. And I told her, I said, we're walking through this busy airport, and I guarantee it, there's people here that we know personally, but we just don't know they're here. And we're going to
Mm-hmm.
probably walk right by them, and we're going to, I mean, that's how the world works. It's very complex like that. And then the last thing is ambiguity. Ambiguity means that any given fact or any given thing is subject to multiple interpretations. You know, you live in Chicago, and in Chicago, there's White Sox fans and there's Cubs fans.
Well, there's only Cubs fans, but
Well, there's only, okay. So I went to Marquette, where everybody was from Chicago, and if you're the Chicago kids were either one or the other, right? And for whatever reason, I wound up with all the Sox fans, right? So I like the Sox. But say me as someone who likes the White Sox and you as someone who likes the Cubs, we can go to a White Sox Cubs interleague game, and we're going to look at the exact same set of facts.
yeah.
But because of our orientation as Cubs fans or Sox fans, we're going to look at the same set of facts and interpret them differently, right? That's a ambiguity exists everywhere, because everybody's got a unique perception on what they see and what they interact with. So when you round all that up as VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and you accept as a human, you know what? That's the way it is. That's the way the world works. I can't eradicate that. I can't eliminate that. What I can do is look at it differently and see it as an advantage, not as an inhibitor. That's part one. I got you. Are you with me so far?
No, 100%. I mean, you know, total sense in everything that I've been able to do, right, with different businesses. I've been in telecom, automotive, and finance the last 15, 16 years. And it's interesting to kind of hear the process that you're going through and understand that there's tangible ways that I could connect to one of those areas, right, at any point in my life, right? Or the part that I'm in, all right, use this to get through that, right? You know, if VUCA, then OODA, right? I'm an acronym guy, as you said, you know, John the Bomb, building others means business. It's interesting, you know, in businesses that I've been in, that's kind of always been my forte. I'll build others, right? Refer to others, network others, and then all of a sudden I build myself,
Yeah.
right? Because it adds, you know, reciprocity into the world. The energy is there that business comes back to me either way, right? So it's interesting. So I love what you're saying.
And this is and you're hitting on the really cool part of this, because as we get into this, you're going to see, and most successful entrepreneurs, most successful athletes, most successful right? Anything. A lot of this, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, we're kind of doing this, or I'm already doing this. And the answer to that is more than likely yes. And my other thesis is that when you become aware of how all this actually works, and you understand how it differentiates you from people that don't see the world this way, that's your advantage. The VUCA, the chaos, the complexity, you know, the uncertainty, the volatility, that becomes your advantage. And that advantage for you is an inhibitor for your competition. And once so we get to the next thing here, we're going to show you how you develop that thought, how you train teams with that. And you mentioned the term OODA. The acronym OODA stands for observe, orient, decide, act. We're going to start with the second O, orient. And the concept here is orientation. I want you to think of orientation. I want you to think who you are, where you're from, what you've learned, what's your psychological state. Think of all your previous experiences. Think of how you break things down analytically and how you put things together to create. You know, how do you put things together synthetically to create something new that didn't previously exist, right? That's what an entrepreneur does. Think of your creative engines. Think of your, you know, everything that you've done and who you are factors in to how you perceive the world, right? So I use this with Steve when we talk this a lot with groups. In your internal operating system, right? Technology mimics nature. Well, the technology that I have in my smartphone, it has an operating system that has to be updated, that has to be refined, that has to be adjusted. It has to be kept current, or else what happens? What happens if I don't keep my internal operating system updated?
Yeah, I mean, sluggish. You start missing opportunities, right? With new ways of doing things. You're not as crisp, right? It's not efficient, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it could expose you to threats. It could lead you to obsolescence or irrelevance. You're not going to be able to adapt. You're not going to be able to survive because your operating system is misaligned from the current reality. Your operating system is inhibiting you from seeing what actually is, or coming up with better understanding of it. So orientation is, you know, who we are, what we see, what's speaking to you now, what's hearing what I'm saying. OODA is merely how orientation works. So my orientation shapes my observations. So my orientation as a White Sox fan we're going to look at the same game. My orientation as a White Sox fan is going to shape how I see it, which would be different how you see it, right? Orientation is also going to shape how I act automatically. There's certain things that I can just do because I've experienced it so many times. I'm able to just do them. The overall process of OODA linearly would be I observe, I process those observations through my orientation. I come up with a decision, which is just a hypothesis of what I think will happen. And then I act, which is nothing more than a test of that decision. And then a lot of people might have heard the term OODA loop. The loop is actually just the learning that comes back from what I've done. And as things continue to change, and it goes back to the beginning where I'm constantly augmenting my orientation by what I see and what I learn from my decisions and actions. That's how entrepreneurs adjust. That's how creators create. That's how athletes outperform, right? They're constantly making adjustments. They understand that the game that they're in, the markets that they're in are VUCA. So I'm going to have to adjust how I see things to account for that change so that I can see opportunities before somebody else, so that I can see mismatches before somebody else, so that I can see a gap and fill it before a competitor does. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
And Gopher CEO community. I mean, the last, minute and a half, 2 minutes there, just really rewind that again and take some notes, right? Because every single letter has a purpose, right? And when you talk about linear and then also trying to decipher that and what you do inside of each of those opportunities, you're growing, right? And then you got to take those actions, right? So it's interesting at the end, right? That the A is the action, right? Because ultimately you can learn all this stuff. If you're not implementing and acting on it, right? Knowledge without action is really nothing, right? So,
and that's what we have to have the bias for. We have to have a bias for action. We have to understand that when we act, the learning from that action, with the feedback that we get, that can't stop. As soon as that stops, we're in trouble. As soon as we stop learning, another way to describe OODA, it's a framework, or it's an understanding of how we learn as humans, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, as athletes. That's how we learn. We have our coding, right? We have our internal operating system, which shapes how we interact with the world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And then we as entrepreneurs, we as leaders, we as athletes, we as Marines, doesn't matter. we look at the same set of facts differently than our competitors, our opponents, and the things that we see differently, the mismatches that are generated from that, that's where we apply our business offerings. That's where we apply force. That's where we attack them on the football field, right? We're looking for those sorts of mismatches before others do.
I love it. So, it's interesting, right, to keep on, diving into those areas. And I'm sure, audience, right, sees all the books behind you. So you've obviously put more than 10,000 hours of just, download and download and download and download, right? So let's transition just a little bit, only because I really want to give some area of focus too to AGLX. So
Yeah.
you get this VUCA, right? You were part of the adaptive entrepreneur model, right? You created it. You got this sense of it. You're in the wholesale business of financial world. How does AGLX come into your mind? You said you weren't one of the founders, but you're one of the partners.
Mm-hmm.
And so to walk us through that, because a lot of people don't realize that you can go from intrapreneur to entrepreneur very quickly, right? But if you sometimes don't have that intrapreneur mindset, it really cripples you to become an entrepreneur. A lot of entrepreneurs that are naturally there or create ideas and buy businesses, all that type of stuff, right? But I love that intrapreneur to entrepreneur, which is kind of what Steve and I have talked about, a lot of that intrapreneur side. So walk us through what brought you to AGLX, and what is that looking like right now? Who are the clients that you're working with? Those types of things.
Great question. I left corporate America, corporate asset management, 12/31 of 21, and I took a year. I set my own LLC to do this individually, and it took a lot of study time, a lot of deep reflection, and going back over, COVID, by the way, when COVID occurred, a lot of people hooked onto the, Netflix binging and food binging. And I kind of did the opposite. So, I would get anywhere from 3 to 5 hours of commuting a day that I was no longer doing. So I do distance swimming and I do barbell training. And then to your point earlier, yeah, I do a lot of reading and studying. And I've always been working on this theory that, how can you help people thrive? And I thought that, Wall Street or asset management was a really interesting place to do it because it's constantly changing. That's what I loved about it, was that no 2 days were alike. Everything was constantly changing. I worked remote and out of my car visiting clients. So everything was in a constant state of flux and change, which I'm really comfortable in as a Marine. That's our home, so to speak. When I had found, so the CEO of AGLX, who's my co-host on our podcast, No Way Out, Brian Rivera, his call sign's Ponch. He's a F-14 Tomcat guy. We connected, over the years, we've been in the same kind of circle that are really pursuing these theories. And I should have said at the beginning that, the theory of OODA was discovered by a Air Force colonel by the name of John Boyd. And John Boyd was a globally renowned, he's a globally renowned strategist. He passed away in 1997, but he's such a unique thinker. And the Marine Corps embraced him as one of their own to redo their warfighting doctrine. So he's very influential. He's very influential on that. When I linked up with Ponch years ago, we kind of met on the same intellectual plane, right? Like we believe the same things, and he has some really fascinating takes that, I'm a liberal arts guy, right? I'm a Bachelor of Arts in History and I have a master's in economics, but he integrated a lot. He woke me up to a lot of the science stuff, a lot of the neuroscience, a lot of the things that are going on in the mind and the brain with all of what we just talked about, not the verbal sort of cognitive understanding of it, but like what's actually systematically happening inside your brain when you're doing this, when you're making decisions, you're interacting with others, etc. So in that sort of almost year of reflection and really thinking of what I wanted to do next, I knew I wanted to be a teacher of this. I knew I wanted to be a consultant. And as a Marine, it's so much better to do things with teams. We're not really lone wolves. So to join on with a group, we're all veterans. We have a group here in America, and then we have a group in Asia Pacific, and we're vets. And we're not really selling like, hey, we learned this in the military, it's awesome and you should do it too, because the military is right about everything. It's absolutely not that. It's more like, we learned a lot in the military about these things, and we've continued down paths of research and integrating things that had nothing to do with the military to help inform our own understanding of how we operate in complexity. And we can in turn help leaders in their organizations by showing them what we've learned, and at the same time continue to learn, because again, everything is always changing. None of it's really set in stone. But everybody, if you look at our website, it's confidence and complexity. That's our home. That's where we're really comfortable. If there's no I always say, if there's no chaos, I'm not I'm not comfy. And I have 4 teenagers, so and I'm married to a nurse who's also phenomenal at everything we talked about. The same exact thing applies to nurses, and man, they're phenomenal at this stuff.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, well, welcome to chaos. 4 kids and a nurse for a spouse, right? You got the Latino side, you got this other mixes, right? So it's incredible. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I think one of the ways that we can kind of transition there is, what are some of the ways that when you first initiate contact with a potential client that you're doing? So give us a little bit of maybe the infrastructure steps, right? Do you do some discovery meetings? Do you jump into learning about that organization's processes and things? Like, what is it that you actually do to then create, a mechanism of client, producer relationship, right, from an AGLX perspective?
A lot of it comes from networking, right? A lot of it comes from a lot of those discovery meetings really come from networking. I think for me personally, it's trying to display empathy, right? To try to get a good understanding of what actually is going on, and who are the people involved. I spent time in the Marines 2 years as a liaison officer. And a liaison officer is someone that represents one agency and goes to another in sort of a partnership format. I approached my job wholesaling the same way. I saw myself as a liaison officer, and I would try to integrate into the advisory businesses of those who I was trying to help. And that was always the goal, is like, I'm going to help you, make you better from the inside out with what I've learned. And some would give me the Heisman and say, I'm smarter than you. I've been in this business for 40 years. There's nothing you can teach me. And anything the military did is not better than what I learned at whatever Ivy League college. And like some people might get really upset about that. I didn't. I just moved to the next person. But I think in those engagements, you have to have a lot of empathy and try to figure out what's actually going on. What are people actually trying to accomplish? The deep part of it, the profound part of it, I think, is really discussing leadership, the quality, not leadership, the position, and showing that everybody in an organization displays leadership the quality to some extent. And if you can help them get better at that as they interact with other people, it's going to create a lot more speed for organizations. And speed, and as you know, is critical for an entrepreneur. So yeah, that discovery process is kind of seeing where are they at, and in most cases, especially if everybody's done well, or they're doing well, and it's usually people, by the way, that are good at something that want to get better, right? Who seeks out coaching, right? You can't, we like acronyms, KITA, right? The know-it-all. You can't teach them anything, right? No. They don't want to learn, and that's they move on, and then you say to yourself, I'd love to be their competitor, I'm going to help your competitors see what you don't, and when that opportunity comes, they're going to do really they're going to do better. But that's, I guess that's the other thing too. When you're coming from a military background, one of the hardest things, even in almost 20 years of being out of the military, is just really understanding that leadership, the quality, is not taught the way it is in an organization like you mentioned, the SEALs too, and things, groups like that. Leadership is a quality.
Mm-hmm.
That's critical.
I love it.
That's really critical.
It's such a great mindset, right? Go for CEO was birthed out of driven by mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got goosebumps real quick when you talked about every position in an organization is a leader, right?
Yeah.
I've always, and that's kind of the birth of Go for CEO. It's not really that you are a CEO, right? Which is awesome. You can be, right? But it's more of a challenge that everybody at every position. When I got into finance in the banking world, at a branch level and the retail side, I would challenge the tellers that had interactions with clients coming into the branches, right? Look, you own this position,
right?
The banker, then the business banker, the commercial guy, right? The treasury manager, whatever, all that type of stuff. And it's been interesting, right? Because that's the mantra of, can you go for CEO, right? Can you be the CEO of your life, have a mantra and go and be a leader? So awesome. So, so you start the discovery.
Can I add on that?
Yeah, please.
So everything that you just said, and this is another part of engaging with leaders and teams, is once everybody on the team understands that, and once everybody on the team understands, say, for example, the process of OODA, right? We're talking about decision making. When everybody understands the purpose of why an organization exists or why a business exists, the why, the value that you're creating, and the what, the mission that has to get done, when everybody owns that, that's when the leadership as a quality really comes out. And the leaders, the entrepreneurs, the CEOs, they actually can be faster as their organization has, the decentralized sort of decision making where everybody takes ownership of what has to happen. So as you talk about a bank, what needed to happen happens at the teller level. The teller doesn't have to ask the manager doesn't have to ask the supervisor doesn't have to ask the branch manager doesn't have to ask the regional, you know what I mean? So much of that happens. And then the person that you're creating value for, what are they left with? Is they're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then they get the answer and it comes back and comes back and comes back. And when in a decentralized model where everybody has ownership of what has to happen, that's the third part, by the way, of the adaptive entrepreneurial model, the purpose-driven actions of creating value for the people that we're creating value for. When the leadership at a quality is so profound, the lowest person in the organization can handle things. It's not that we don't know about it, right? Because the information, you want it to flow back, but that makes you quicker. Because when your competitors don't have decentralized organization where everything is centralized and everything has to approve by one person that makes all the decisions for the whole company, as if they could completely understand everybody's perspective. And we know that's impossible because of VUCA. That leader, that entrepreneur that hoards all the information, that makes all the decisions themselves, they have no control over things. They think they do, but they really don't. They become a single point of failure. And it gets to the point where if I'm the only person that can make all the decisions, as if I could see everything, all that's going to do is degrade the organization over time and make it slower. That's not adaptive. That's not learning. Yeah.
You made me think of something too, right? When you go from employee to entrepreneur, which is really a solopreneur at the beginning, right? The only way you jump over to business owner, which is where you have a team, is to do exactly that, right? Is decentralize, and obviously there's chain of command and all that good stuff, but it's interesting to kind of understand why there's so many small to medium-sized businesses, and this channel caters to the Go for CEO community, but why we challenge a solopreneur to become a business owner by having that type of scenario, right? Where they understand VUCA and OODA and then create a process, right? To then jump over to the business owner side. I know cash flow quadrants from Robert Kiyosaki talks about it in a very cool way, right? So awesome, brother. Well, look.
And by the way, I'm going to point out that Robert Kiyosaki is a United States Marine.
Yeah, 100%.
And he's also a naval aviator, and it's an example of a tremendous mind that can work with volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environments and come up with very original thinking. So
I love it. I love it, man. So look, you take this journey, right? In the wholesale world, in the financial world, you had the military experience. You then jump in, and at the end of 2021, you make that decision to now go step in from entrepreneur to entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's been a year, right? And now you're a partner. What are some things that you're doing to be able to create value inside of the organization of, like, when the client meets with you, what kind of tools are you guys implementing? Obviously from these parts, right? Then how are companies changing, creating more volume and generating more revenue, those types of things?
Yeah. So if you look at our website, you'll see that a big part of it is, a lot of the things that we've talked about, right? Like helping people adapt, training leaders, training leadership to quality. The other big part of it's the flow system, and Brian Rivera, who is the CEO of our group, he's the co-author with John Turner and Nigel Thurlow of the flow system. And the flow system is it's a 3-pillared approach that it's customer first, customers the focus, creating value for the customer is the focus. It's rooted in the Toyota way and the Toyota production system. That's sort of the foundation, which, by the way, back to John Boyd, that was a big thing that he studied, the Japanese way of doing business, specifically the Toyota production system and the Toyota way. And then the 3 pillars are a lot of what we discussed already: complexity thinking, distributed leadership, and team science. Ultimately, when we train and interact with people to get them to understand sort of the tenets of that, of which OODA is one, and some other things that we've talked about, the ultimate goal is flow. You move with the flow. VUCA can be a flow for you if you look at it differently, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. But rooted in, not just rooted in the military, but rooted in a lot of cognitive science, cognitive psychology, neuroscience. If you're familiar with the Cynefin framework by Dave Snowden, that's a big part of. He's on episode 2 of our podcast. That's a big part. It's teamwork, team quality. It can, building culture, really. And think about when you build a culture, clients want to be a part of it, customers want to be a part of it, people want to be a part of it to run the organization. I just got back from Quantico, Virginia. One of my best friends got promoted, and I've been out for almost 20 years, but the bond that we have from that culture and all the people that I've got to, I spent the night at a former commander's house, just that's the kind of culture that doesn't have to be unique to the Marines. You can make that yourself in your own venture, whatever it is, where people are connected that way. And I don't know, part of me thinks that's what we're here for.
Yeah, no, you're making me think. There's a competitor, a buddy of mine. He's a former Marine. He's one of the guys at PHP. It's an insurance agency, and I saw him move from our organization, because I have a financial agency as well, and you could see the energy and the connectedness that organization has, because they talk about minorities running that business. Women is a big part of their organization, right? So they have a larger percentage of minority, a larger percentage of women that weren't really in the financial services industry. if you take the old curmudgeon 55 to 65-year-old white males, right, that are in financial services typically, and the culture that they built. So it's really interesting. And I've seen it from afar. He's a buddy of mine, and we talked about Patrick Bet-David and some of the things he's done with valuetainment and all that stuff. So
yeah, he's a veteran too.
Yeah, and he's an Army guy, right? So yeah, I mean, look, makes me think of there is, I don't even know if I want to go, but the one regret I do have is being an only child, kind of being a mama's boy when I was younger. I was entrepreneur at 19 and young, but I missed out on that military. It's probably the one thing I'll go to my resting place wishing I would have done, right? So is being a part of that community. So
I appreciate that. And I would say that, one of the things that we do, and one of the things that I do is show people, hey, these principles that you can access all the stuff online. One thing I do, if you look at it's called war fighting. Anybody can Google this, you can put it on the show notes. This is a PDF of the Marine Corps' prime codex of thinking. It's called Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication #1, War Fighting. And it's a way of thinking about everything we just talked about: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, in the context of war fighting. Now, I've sat down with many people from many different backgrounds, from many different industries that have not spent one day in the military. And we go through that publication. It's not very big. It's not big at all. We cross out war fighting and we put ice hockey. We cross out enemy and we put other team. And we cross out, offense and defense, and we can put in, I don't know, manufacturing. I mean, there's the transferability is perfect. And I tell people, look, your tax dollars pay for this stuff. It's all online for free, and this is what your Marine Corps has done over the years of coming up and doing this thinking and sharing how we think about chaos and how we operate in it. That was one of my big appeals to coming over with AGLX, because again, they've done a really good job of showing how what you learned is easily translatable to businesses that would, by and large, have people that were never in the military. And when you think about so the 3 pillars, complexity thinking, and everything goes first to the customer, right? Everything goes to the client value. That's the primary aim, right? To serve. I mentioned that it's founded on what Boyd was studying himself, the Toyota way. Constantly getting better, right? Continuous improvement. You could see why the Marines would study the Toyota way, right? Constant improvement. And then with the customer first, respect for each other, working in teams as your foundational culture, you execute in those 3 pillars. Complexity thinking, we talked about VUCA. You get people comfortable with that. You get them to see that we're all complex adaptive systems. We're all operating daily in nonlinear and chaotic environments. And there's ways of thinking, like understanding OODA and understanding the Connecticut framework, that will help us make better sense of all the complexity that we're dealing with. The distributed leadership, we were talking a little bit about that. The environment should be such that everybody leads, everybody has leadership to quality. And I, as the entrepreneur, the CEO, I've created an environment where feedback is welcome, where we solicit feedback from every perspective. You were talking about, various groups that create diversity inside an organization. The value is the perspectives that we gain that we wouldn't have considered before. And we have to have an environment that's safe for people to talk about what they saw, because that perspective is going to help me as a leader make better decisions. That's going to make the organization faster. So we do a lot with the after action reports, after action reviews, and the power of debriefing, because what that promotes is active learning. And if an organization's not learning, if a leader's not learning, they're not adapting. And if they're not adapting, they're dying. We do a lot with mapping. So like visualizing, like what do we want to have happen? People should look up Wardley maps. Wardley mapping is a big part of that. And then the team science, it all centers around, again, people, ideas, and things. people want to work with other people. We're social beings. The more that we understand how people can improve that interaction with each other, then the more that we can do. I loved being a solo consultant. It was fun. I learned a lot. I gave a lot of great talks and did things, but being in a team environment for me is better because I get checks and balances. I get feedback on what I did. I get to contribute feedback, so we're constantly learning from each other. How we design teams. The concept of red teaming is, it's not popular in business sometimes, but it's taking a devil's advocate approach to something that we're trying to accomplish, because that feedback that I could have gotten from an opposing view might help me refine, might give me a perspective that I had not yet considered, and it might help me refine what I want to do going forward. And that's that's again part of the team science. It's encouraging interaction and debate that's never against the person, right? If we're doing feedback and you're making a personal comment at me, that's not appropriate, right? That you can't have that. And you also can't influence unduly with your rank. So when you're doing this, you leave your rank and your emotion outside, and you get more feedback, you solicit more ideas, you gain more perspectives that you wouldn't have gotten. And that could help entrepreneurs and leaders uncover blind spots that they're not considering. You put all that together and you're working towards flow, and you're using VUCA, the ups and downs, the waves of VUCA. Now you're surfing it, right? Now you have a surfboard, and you've got a knowledge base, and not just knowledge, you got an understanding base that's an advantage, and you can make that a disadvantage. You see that as a disadvantage for your competitors, and you can build on that and get faster and faster and better and better. But could go on for hours about that.
No, hey, look, I've said it many times on this channel, and I learned it from a great, wise mentor of mine named Greg Cap. Things are caught, not taught.
Yeah.
And what you just said right now, actually, I have a Tuesday meeting with a team that we're getting together, and you just actually popped something in my head. I'm like, man, I got to write that down as soon as we're done here, because that is exactly one of the challenges that we're having in this team. And I think that productive feedback, and no matter the VPs, the SVPs, whatever, they're getting together, leaving that aside and giving that true context feedback so that we can have an incredible 2023. So appreciate that, man. I just caught something there that I'm going to use for Tuesday. So Mark, one of the ways that we, kind of end our podcast is to be able to share the CEO side of things, right? So with AGLX and the things that you've done, there's C, it's client experience. E is for engagement. How do others, vendors, people that you work with, subordinates, leaders, how do they engage with you? And what's the magic behind that? And then O is for operational excellence, for CEO. So for client experiences, 30 seconds, a minute or so, what's kind of the high level? And you touched on so many different things, but if you could bring it into one area, when they go to do business with you and AGLX, at this point, what is the client experience at the very top of the house, that you could deliver to someone if they're watching this?
Great question. I think it's, what we talked earlier about empathy, right? Of gaining an understanding of what's truly going on, not violating the order of people, ideas, and things. And the people that we interact with, this is all human-centered. Everything that we're about is human-centered. The flow system is human-centered, and adaptive strategy, it's human-centered, because like John Boyd would teach us, most of what you've heard the term too. I think it was Bobby Jones that said the game of golf is played between the 6 inches between your ears. That's really what it comes down to, mindset. And I think that what people would find is that when you gain a shared understanding of what's going on, and then you're able to offer perspectives that are going to in turn help them become better versions of themselves, help them improve, without flipping the world upside down, because again, most successful organizations are doing these things to a part. But I think it would be, it's like a trusted advisory experience. Again, I go back to my time as a liaison officer. You become part of that organization to an extent, and you're helping, you're teaching. I mean, it's really a teaching thing. The word consulting, I prefer teaching. I think that teaching and learning is a better thing. So I think that it's there's a teaching component of it. There's a massive learning component, because without the learning, we don't adapt. So.
Well, I appreciate you breaking that down for us.
And I would add this too. So as you know, I mean, I'm the the quote unquote new guy of the partners, but we've developed and launched. Brian Rivera and I have developed and launched our podcast. No Way Out is the title, and it's another methodology of how we engage. And the idea behind that is kind of like we're doing now, is if people are listening into a conversation between two thinkers, or a conversation between two leaders, or a conversation of a team, and they get to listen in and take notes. That's the goal, to create a learning conversation of that podcast, versus kind of like we have here, versus a structured tennis match, of like question 1, answer, question 2, answer. And you're doing that too.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think the key is learning. I think that the key is learning and sharing, and helping promote understanding of the various things that we talk about with the flow system and OODA and other things.
I have a buddy of mine that just popped in my head. He ends every conversation with "ever forward." So it's really neat. It's like when he shares a speech, or he's talking to you, and it's interesting, he always ends it with "ever forward," right? So it's really cool. I had him on the podcast. Well, awesome. So E is engagement, right? When you think about Mark and your life and your family and the people that you work with, and Brian, you're doing this No Way Out podcast. Like, what's one of the top reasons that people like to engage with you?
Well, I think I try to be a good team player. I try to be a good listener. I sometimes I talk too much, I guess. Like we get going. I think that I'll give you an example. So I was the other day with a buddy of mine who was my former commander. I'd always tell him what he needed to hear, not necessarily what he wanted to hear, but you tell him what he needed to hear. And I learned that at a very early age from another military officer who's in the Army. He said that's the critical component, is telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, because what they need to hear, if it's connected to the reality of the situation, that's what's going to help them learn and help them adapt. That was actually my papa that taught me that.
Yeah. No, so, that's awesome.
Another Puerto Rican American military veteran there, but yeah, that's the difference. You tell people what they need to hear. Yeah, you do it in a respectful, understanding way. But I think too that people would find when they, like for me personally, they engage with me. I was born an Army brat. I lived all over the world. I have a very eclectic makeup. Irish, Puerto Rican, and a handful of other things. Of parents that were born in New York City, and I was born in Kentucky, and I lived in Germany, and then I went away to college. I went to high school in Pittsburgh, went away to college at Milwaukee at Marquette, and served all around the world in the Marines. So like, I feel like I've had this really eclectic upbringing from a very eclectic, sort of genetic mix from my parents. And offering people other perspectives that are differentiated and might be something different than somebody that works directly for them or whatever. It might give them a different view.
It's important, right? I mean, the seeds that were planted for many decades there have arrived right where you are, who you are, and why people engage. I mean, our first connection was just on a text, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden we got on a phone. We've connected, and obviously we had a few weeks here to set up the date for the podcast, but there's been little things that we've kind of planted, right? And we're like, man, this is a good connection, right? We're going to stay connected for a long time. So last one is operations, right? So, and that can mean many different things. You've hinted, you've put together already throughout this podcast, different things that you operate in when you meet with clients and stuff, but any high level things that you want to share from an entrepreneur perspective, or that you do on a daily basis that help you operate your business?
Well, I think it goes back to the adaptive entrepreneurial model, which you can put on the show notes and share with everybody. To use that as a framework, that's going to help improve their operations and literally everything they do, business life, et cetera. Because if I understand that the nature of the universe is always going to be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and I have to orient to that, and I have to understand how I orient, and I have to understand what my orientation actually is and how my orientation shapes how I see things. And then I marry that with a very crystal clear intent. What has to happen and why? And everybody on my team that understands that, that's all I have to tell them. I don't have to show them how to do anything. They can figure it out. I think that operationally, people would find that they're going to get a lot more speed. They're going to witness a lot more harmony amongst their people. They're going to witness a lot more initiative. People are going to, not do the wrong thing without asking. They're going to do the right thing without asking, because they're going to have an understanding of what has to happen. And then I think the flow of information that advances the learning, that empowers everybody in the system, in the organization to learn as they go, that's going to make them more adaptable. Everything operationally will smooth out, or at least be smoother than it currently is. And here's the best news. These things are simple. Unfortunately, you got to do the work. I mean, you have to actually do the work, and that's why we're in business. We can help people see that. But once you get it and you understand it, it's gonna the improvement that comes from that. That's the goal. The constant improvement of creating value for the people that we're serving. That framework, it's a pretty reasonably simple map. It's not rocket science. And like I said, it's simple, but not easy, but I know it's effective because it's a restatement of what we were taught as leaders to prepare us for those types of, warfighting environments. But business is the same principles. To pull the principles out and apply them, that's going to improve. I think that would improve operational excellence.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, you dropped a ton of knowledge, Mark, and super appreciative, and looking forward to, collaborating and doing some things in the future here. So what are some ways that people can reach out to you, be it on LinkedIn or what have you? Where are you accessible, and how can, really founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, get a hold of you to be a part of the possible journey with AGLX and what you're doing?
So a couple of ways. Great question. So one would be LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Mark J. Mc Grath, Columbus, Ohio. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I put everything I post. If you go on my profile and hit posts, you're going to see a lot of what we talked about, hopefully lucidly and clearly. So I'm trying to always improve my writing, but that's a very simple way to follow myself. And then my co-host on the No Way Out podcast is Brian Pontrevera, and he puts out a lot of stuff too on complexity thinking, and you can link to his TED Talks and things like that. Then this number two would be our podcast. So wherever you digest podcasts, be it Apple, Spotify, wherever, it's called No Way Out. We've never done a podcast explaining the title, but it was a working title for a brief of John Boyd, and it's dedicated to the memory of John Boyd and advancing and developing his theories, all of which we've been talking about. So the podcast can be downloaded. It's fairly new, so we've released 4 so far. We have a lot recorded coming out. We're at the pace of 1 a week right now. So as we improve that, you'll see more. But I think that you're also going to find that there's a diversity of thinkers. So we just had a phenomenal conversation yesterday with a very well-known neuroscientist, and she talks a lot about the brain and diet that helps the brain. And she's also a very big fan of John Boyd and his theory. So it's really an interesting conversation. That's number 2. Number 3 is the flow guides. So if you go to flowguides.org, you can see the flow system. There's a web version you can download as a PDF, and it gives you an overview of one of the things that we do as a team at AGLX, and a lot of what we teach, and a lot of it there is what we were talking about. So those are 3 simple ways. Follow us on LinkedIn, download the podcast, and check out flowguides.org. And we have it in multiple languages too. So there's a version in Espanol that's pretty good.
Nice. Awesome, brother. Well, hey, super excited. And Go for CEO community, leave some comments, like this video, share it with your audiences. Mark is a wealth of knowledge, and what he's doing at AGLX, what he's done before, and the experiences that they have. And you just heard some of the great ways to be able to connect with him and move forward. So thank you, Mark. Super appreciative of your time, and we'll have you back